love you one more.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
Okay, man, how are you?
Not too bad. Hey, thanks for taking some time to talk about some Vanilla Zeppelin here. So you have this new record. Well, it's actually not a new record, right? This is a reissue of the Out Through the Indoor, right? Is that correct?
That's what it is, yeah. I mean, we actually, yeah, go ahead.
So what inspired you guys to put this out again? Because I know it didn't get its proper due the first time around.
Well, I guess the Golden Robot Records out of Australia, I really thought it was a good effort, and they wanted to pick it up and remaster it and redistribute it. So we actually recorded it way back in 2006. I thought it was a pretty good creative effort, and we'll see how to do with it. They can get some good coverage with it on this new release.
Yeah, I mean, and having spoken with Carmine a handful of times, I know this one that particular record was referenced in one of the conversations I had with him, so I definitely went back and checked it out. So I was definitely excited to see it get reissued, because it's been long out of print at this point. What's your thoughts in listening back to the record? Because I know it's like, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, it's not would you call it a covers record? I mean, because you guys reworked the tunes.
Well, back when we recorded it, the whole premise behind it was because we had a history with Led Zeppelin. We were all young in the late 60s. When they started out, they actually, we actually broke them in. And when it came to America, after the Yardbirds broke up, Jimmy Page, signed this new band called Led Zeppelin with Atlantic Atco Records. And we were label mates, and the first two tours in America, we played a lot of shows together. So we knew each other as kids, and we kind of, watched them become the juggernaut that they became. But we thought it would be a good tie-in to do our approach to Led Zeppelin songs because of our history. So that was the premise behind doing it. And I thought it came out pretty cool. I was proud of it. I remember listening to it a lot when it first came out. And quite honestly, I haven't, now that it's coming out as Vanilla, it was Out Through the Indoor, right? That was the name of it?
Yeah, correct.
So now it's reissued under Vanilla Zeppelin, which what they wanted to do, I guess. But I guess I got to re-listen to it. I haven't heard it in a while.
Okay.
But Days of Confused is like one of my favorite tracks on that. I remember that.
Yeah.
And actually, that's one of the tunes that we do live, and people really dig this song. We do it live, so that's pretty cool. And we actually do a medley with Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. Actually, I kind of sing that in the middle of it. We do this dynamic thing where it really works. But I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And and the Immigrant song I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like the synthesizer symphonic intro thing I did on it, and I mean, I thought that came out pretty good. A lot of good energy on it,
Yeah, I mean, you guys definitely did an excellent job in reworking those tunes. I think the only tune that really sounds remotely kind of pretty much on spot is Moby Dick, but that's basically because it's an instrumental, and the drums are the key instrument pretty much on that one. But man, you covered everything. Like you said, Immigrant Song, there's Rock and Roll on there. That one's reworked. Ramble On's one of my favorites. Same with Dancing Days.
Yeah, Ramble On was kind of cool, I'm thinking about it. I like a lot of sequencing, kind of Toto-ish kind of keyboard stuff I was doing on the beginning. It's got some mystical stuff, and I thought that was cool. I thought the vocals came out pretty cool, and I remember when it came out, it got some really good reviews. So
yeah, it definitely did.
Reissuing it, maybe it'll find some traction, some legs. That would be nice.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was hoping, because, like I said, in talking with Carmine, this was a while back. He had mentioned this, and I was like, wow, that sounds familiar, but I don't think I've ever heard it. So I had to track one down. But I'm definitely thrilled that this has a second shot in the arm. Fool in the Rain's another good one. I mean, I think the whole album, top to bottom, I mean, you can't really go wrong with Zeppelin. You know?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a ton of Zeppelin clone bands, you know, but I think our approach to this music was our own approach. That's what Vanilla Fudge was, you know, famous for, taking other people's songs and making them their own. So we kind of tried that same approach with this one.
Yeah, because I know, you know, you had the hit with "Keep Me Hangin On," right? So I mean, I think you guys were pretty much accustomed to putting your own stamp on whatever songs you did. Yeah. Do you remember kind of how you guys determined to insert Your Time Is Gonna Come on here? Because I think that's probably the deepest cut on this particular record. Any recollection of that and how that one wound up on the well, I guess we can refer to it as Vanilla Zeppelin because that's the new remastered version of the record.
No, I remember being in the studio and trying to come up with this cool, organ intro. So I did these dissonant chords, you know, my right hand and the left hand, and it's like, they did a great job with John Paul Jones, man. Mm-hmm. Did a great organ track on that original thing. That's one of my favorite organ things in rock from the 60s, what he did with that Your Time Is Gonna Come. Beautiful organ on that. So it's really hard to top that, man. I just remember just trying to come up with something my own, kind of similar, but, you know, kind of my own kind of approach. And that's kind of what I remember. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we just kind of, you know, played our own groove to it, and the vocal was kind of fun to do on it.
Yeah.
Do you like the way that track came out? I got to listen to it again.
Oh yeah, no, I like it. I mean, like I said, I'm a huge Zeppelin fan, but I also like the way you guys kind of reworked everything. Again, you know, I don't see it as a covers record. I see it more as a tribute. You know, and you know, like we were talking about earlier. Yeah, you put your own stamp on it, kind of like you've done with any other tunes that you guys have done in the past.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What's your thought on the renaming of the record? I kind of like it. The Vanilla Zeppelin.
I'm sorry, I'm losing you there.
Oh, I said, what do you think of the retitling of the album to Vanilla Zeppelin? I said I kind of like it.
What do I think of the fact that they're calling it Vanilla Zeppelin?
Yeah, right.
I don't know what to think. I mean, Out Through the Indoor was kind of like
right.
Kind of like a humorous thing, because originally it was In Through the Outdoor, and we said Out Through the Indoor. But now they're calling it Vanilla Zeppelin. I guess the marketing team thought it made sense.
Yeah.
Because, people probably figure, okay, so it's going to be our take on rearranging Zeppelin songs. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really bother me. It's something I guess I got to get used to it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
I want to see a copy of. Haven't seen an actual copy of the CD.
Oh, nice.
But
yeah, it's cool, man.
Yeah,
it's cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I enjoy it. Like I said, fan of your reworking of all this stuff. What's the game plan? I mean, do you guys foresee doing any kind of special events where you perform this album, or at least some of the tunes off this album?
Well, I mean, again, we're still out there playing shows, and we do Days of Confused from that album, and I always talk about our history with Led Zeppelin and what inspired it, the whole 9 yards, you know.
Right.
Talk about the early days when when they opened for Vanilla Fudge, and we had multiple albums and singles all over the Billboard and Catchbox charts back in those days.
Right.
And we used to hang out with the guys when we were all kids, and a lot of fun together. And they used to watch us play, and I know we inspired them with their live show. And they know that we were one of their favorite bands in the early days. So I think it's pretty cool. And the fact that we played 2 major tours together. And, I mean, I used to hang out with all of them. We used to be at Tim Bogert, God rest his soul. He was having an apartment in New Jersey by the George Washington Bridge that was kind of overlooking the river. And all the Zeppelin guys be up at his house, and I'd be up there with him. We'd all be partying, listening to their first album, and we were just good friends when we were young, and shared a lot of things together on the road. And actually, I can remember also in Albuquerque when we were doing our second tour. I remember Page and Plant sat me and Carmine down, and they played the acetates to the second Zeppelin album before anybody ever heard it. I mean, that was like a seminal moment. Yeah. I'm listening to, What Is and What Should Never Be, and a Whole Lot of Love. I'm listening to the acetate. That's like a demo before the actual album was pressed in those days.
Oh.
So, yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. Now, did you have any inkling, though, that these guys were going to be as huge as they became? I mean, they huge. Well,
you know what? I saw them grow like really fast after 4 or 5, half a dozen shows. They were really getting it together really quick. They were great and had incredible passion and incredible love for what they were doing. I remember talking to their wives and girlfriends at the beginning of the second tour. I remember saying, you guys, before you know it, they're going to be as big as the Cream. That's what I said to them.
Right.
Because Cream was the biggest draw in the arenas at that time, Mm-hmm. So, needless to say, they far surpassed that.
Yeah.
And before you knew it, they just became the biggest band in the world. And that's the name of that tune, So.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's awesome. Any cool story that comes to mind about Tim? I know you referenced Tim earlier a few minutes ago, but any cool stories about him, like on the road, or anything that stands out in particular?
Oh my God, me and Tim grew up together.
Yeah, you probably have a ton, but is there one that just kind of stands out that you go,
we grew up together, and I don't know. I'd really have to think about that. Maybe there's one that, what comes to mind is we were doing a concert somewhere in Texas. It might have been San Antonio. The plane landed, right? And they're getting everybody off the plane, and they keep Vanilla Fudge on the plane because they rolled out the red carpet, okay? Mm-hmm. So here we are, a bunch of rock dudes coming off the plane, and there's a red carpet all the way out, and there's like all these people, like a military thing. They're all standing at attention. It was just... I think we were partying for a couple of nights, and Tim was one of his jovial moods, and he just started laughing and cracking up, and I don't know, man, he was just making a big comedy scene out of him. Everybody was looking at him like we were nuts, and we just, it was just an insane time. I got a million stories about Tim, we came up together.
Sure.
Wow. One particular thing I could tell you about is when do you really want to hear a story? Is when he called me up out of the blue. Tim and I hadn't spoken in maybe 7 or 8 years because he had retired from touring, a number of years before while the band kept going on with Pete Bremy on bass. Right. So he called me up, and I was surprised to hear from him. I said, Tim, how you doing? And he said, I just wanted to tell you that I'm very sick, and I'm not going to be in this world much longer. And I was really taken back and said, whoa, wait a minute, back up a little bit. What are you talking about? So he told me that he had cancer, and it was metastasized, all over his body. And I was just, how do you have a conversation? It was just like blew my mind, Right. So we just talked about it. We kind of like initiated a new relationship after not speaking with so many years. Mm-hmm. I talked to him several times after that until he passed, and I just kind of told him, I said, look, man, I know we had a very volatile relationship, but in the end, I know we've always had a deep respect for one another. And, and just before he passed, I called him one more time, and I told him, hey, we don't forget, now and in the afterlife, we once walked as kings together,
Right.
And I told him I loved him, and he said, back at you, and hung up the phone, and that was the last time I spoke to him.
Right.
And he passed maybe a month later. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's always good when you're able to make the peace,
Yeah, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Vanilla Fudge, you know, is one of those bands that definitely influential. You know, you guys influenced a lot of acts. I think one of the bands that you guys directly influenced was also the early Purple, right? Deep Purple?
Yeah, man.
So, tell me about that. I mean, because
Well, you know,
they definitely.
Fudge,
Go ahead.
we were kind of like the darlings of progressive underground music at the time in the late '60s, and you know, we used to tour when we toured England the first time. You know, Purple came to see us, and they were really like heavily influenced by our approach to music. You know, at one point they were actually called the English Vanilla Fudge in their early career.
Oh.
You can reference Richie Blackmore on Vanilla Fudge. You can, you know, read about it in rock history.
Right.
And we did have a lot of influence on a lot of bands like Uriah Heep and Deep Purple, bands like Yes, and just a whole lot of folks out there. So, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, that was pretty cool to be a part of that glorious time in rock history.
And, you know, I think that era of rock, you know, late 60s through the 70s, I mean, that stuff can't be replicated ever again. You know, I know there's a lot of bands that tried in the 90s, you know, into early 2000s, and even now there's a lot of retro bands, but you can't recapture that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't do a remake of Gone with the Wind and expect it to come off like the original.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I know earlier you mentioned a lot of like the Zepplin clones, yeah, and they haven't had an easy run. You know, I think there's been some few bands in the 80s, and most recently I think there's that band Greta Van Fleet that gets referenced.
Greta Van Fleet, yeah.
As a Zeppelin type influence band. I mean, I think they've had a little. Some
no
success.
question, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. You also did some stuff with Cooper, right? Yeah, you were part of like the solo band, I think. Alice Cooper?
Well, I did a Welcome to My Nightmare tour with Alice Cooper way back in the late 70s.
Well, how'd you get connected with him on that?
Well, I was looking for a gig, and you know, an old late great friend of mine, Bruce Gary, who was the drummer in the Knack. Remember the Knack, Mike Sharona?
Yeah.
Bruce Gary played with the Knack. He played with Jack Bruce. He was a really, really good friend of mine, and he heard that the Alice Cooper band was looking for a keyboard player to do a tour in the Southern Hemisphere, so he recommended him to, to give me a shout. So they did, and I ended up doing the tour. So that was a pretty amazing show, actually.
Yeah.
I turned 30 years old in Perth, Australia in 1977, believe it or not.
Oh, boy. And
I remember they brought me a cake. It was so far away.
Yeah.
Talk about a galaxy long ago and far away. Wow.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm sure there was more than just cake, huh, for the 30th birthday?
Well, it was cake and a lot of those creatures that hop around. What do you call them?
Oh man, well that was probably a cool gig. Then it sounds like any cool Cooper story you have behind that aside from the birthday.
Well, it was interesting because at the time it was the biggest grossing tour of all time back in '77, and there was a band called ABBA.
Oh yeah,
that was probably the biggest band in the world, selling more records than anybody in the world at that time. They were also touring the Southern Hemisphere, so it was kind of cool because you'd look outside the hotel room, and on one side of the street you'd see all the ABBA fans with the ABBA signs, and on the other side of the street you'd see all the Alice Cooper fans with all the Cooper signs, you know? So it was kind of like a rivalry going on in Australia in the streets in all the major cities. So that was kind of fun. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, no kidding. That's kind of different. So
they were good people. I remember having dinner and cocktail parties with ABBA and and the Alice Cooper people, and it was a cool experience. You know?
Nice. Nice. So I know Vanilla Fudge. You know, they you know, like with any band, they try to like pigeonhole the band. You know, they reference Vanilla Fudge as a psychedelic band, psychedelic rock, acid rock.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you describe Vanilla Fudge to somebody that's never experienced the music?
Well, I mean, I just think the band approached our music, you know, symphonically.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't call ourselves psychedelic. In the beginning, it was, we just thought we were like, with four guys, we try to create a symphony with all these arrangements that we came up with, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, the arrangements are like Eleanor Rigby. You know, in retrospect, I mean, for four guys that were basically 20, 21 years old, that was one hell of a creative thing we put together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even the Beatles were impressed. George Harrison loved the arrangements of Eleanor Rigby and Ticket to Ride, and so did Ringo, you know, and so did Jimi Hendrix. They all loved that first album. So to me, it was, you know, just progressive symphonic rock. The critics called it psychedelic rock.
Right.
So that moniker kind of stayed with us, symphonic, psychedelic rock. You know, I mean, we got played like crazy on all the FM stations at that time all over the world. And we were the darlings of underground stations and radio back in those days. And we became really well known really quickly. And before you know it, we were touring with everybody, you know.
Right.
Touring with Hendrix, Mamas and the Papas, Sonny and Cher, and the Fifth Dimension. It was crazy. It was in the eclectic time. You know, it was like all different kinds of music was on the same show. Imagine Vanilla Fudge and the Fifth Dimension on one bill.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And Sonny and Cher, and then the Charles Lloyd Jazz Quartet, whatever it was way back then.
Right.
Those were exciting, creative days, you know, you had to be there. It was pretty amazing, you know.